Son of Hammerland is back, and this month it's twin sons, like the twin sons of Tatooine. But no, has to do with horror movies. And this month, Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC, we are talking about The Plague of the Zombies,
Yes,
and also The Reptile. A lot of those this
that's
month.
right.
So both were released in 1966. Neither of them are Dracula or Frankenstein films. That's why they are in the Son of Hammerland. That's specifically what we're covering this year. So, AC, tell me about The Plague of the Zombies and The Reptile. Is this the first time you've seen both of these, or are you familiar with them?
No, this is actually the fourth time I've seen both of these. I'm a big fan of these, as you can see. Yeah, 1966. Hammers in full swing, and some might say it was starting to kind of crest because these films were part of a 4-picture deal with Seven Arts. They made a deal, said, hey, we can produce 4 films. We'll shoot 2 of them at the same time, back to back on the same sets. And then we'll shoot 2 others at the same time, back to back on the same sets. So the first part of the 4-part deal was Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Rasputin, the Mad Monk. Those 2 were shot on the same sets using some of the same cast members. And Christopher Lee is the lead in both of those. Barbara Shelley's in both. And then the 2 films we're talking about today, The Reptile and Plague of the Zombies, are both set in Cornwall, in the countryside of Cornwall in England, and which is a rarity actually for Hammer, because they're often set in that kind of vaguely Teutonic Hammerland, where it's kind of German, kind of, Transylvanian, it's certainly not England. And these are definitely both English. But anyway, yeah, so these were both shot. First, they shot Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Rasputin, the Mad Monk, and then they shot Plague of the Zombies and then The Reptile. Basically, they wrapped on Plague of the Zombies, and like 2 days later, they started work on The Reptile, giving set production designer Brad Robinson a bit of a headache because he had to rearrange everything very quickly. But I think he did a pretty great job. And part of the fun of watching these back to back is that you can see some of the same, kind of set pieces. Like that bridge shows up in both of them. The courtyard shows up in both of them. The court itself shows up in both of them. So it's kind of fun to play, spot the matching production design.
Well, and also, a couple of the stars of the film shares a couple of stars, Michael Ripper and the actress who plays
Jacqueline Pierce.
Jacqueline Pierce, yes.
Right. She's in both as well.
And she plays the same not the same tragic character, but a tragic
character in both. Yeah.
And I wonder what it would be like if they had swapped her out for one of the leads in either film. I think that would have been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But thematically too, these are very different kind of, they're almost vampire movies in themselves, except they deal with, you've got attacks to the neck in The Reptile. You've got people being transformed, and a lot of like graveyard shenanigans in both of them. I think we've talked about 1 or 2 other movies that are sort of vampire or Frankenstein adjacent, but not really branded as such. They're different kinds of maladies, as it were. So it is fascinating to watch both of these next to each other. Now, you've seen both 4 times. Have you always watched them in pairs? Is this the first time you've watched them in pairs?
No, I feel like I have watched them in pairs before, but this was the first time, kind of with an eye toward comparing and contrasting. It's interesting you bring up the vampire comparison because, and this is on the Shout Factory Blu-ray for Plague of the Zombies, but they talk about this story being actually the most faithful adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula that Hammer ever did. You have a nobleman who is preying upon the locals, murdering them and bringing them back to life to be his, unwilling slaves. You have an intellectual scientist who's kind of set up as his foil, and you have 2 female characters, one of whom dies and is resurrected, and one of whom is almost, is poised to become the vampire bride and is saved at the last minute. And as I was watching, I'm like, wait a minute, that is all true. It was really an interesting thesis, and kind of watching it with that in mind this time around, I was like, that's amazing. I have never picked up on that before, but it does really track. It kind of hits all of the Dracula beats as the story transpires.
And I wonder why they didn't just apply that at some point to an actual Dracula film. Maybe, you know, not saying that they need to, because pretty much all the Draculas that we discussed last year are, unique and fun in their own right. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with Plague of the Zombies, which we'll talk about first, because that's the order that, as you mentioned earlier, that's when they were released. It's also the order in which both of us watched these separately by pure coincidence first, and then we watched the Reptile. So, um, Plague of the Zombies, it's about like voodoo ritual, and both of these films, that's another kind of thematic element, is they talk about kind of black magic from different, or dark magic from different cultures. In Plague of the Zombies, it's voodoo from the far lands of Haiti, as it's
Haiti,
pronounced.
yes.
And then in the Reptile, we're talking about India and some the cultural. I don't know if it's India proper. There are a few different localities mentioned in that.
I think it's Malaysia,
Is it Malaysia?
because
Okay.
he's referred to, that one character is referred to as the Malay. So I'm assuming that is the Malaysian.
Okay. Um, both, I think we would call them possibly problematic depictions today. I don't know. Did that ever bother you? I mean, in the Plague of the Zombies, you've got this kind of a high priest character, a very clearly an English guy who's performing this ritual with these voodoo dolls that come in these wood coffins, these kind of clay figures, and he's dribbling blood over them. And you've got these, kind of black tribesmen banging away on their drums and hooting and howling and everything. Not exactly culturally sensitive, I guess. I don't know. But then again, whenever I think of these issues when it comes to older movies, I often wonder how much of that was, intentionally culturally insensitive
Right.
versus we just didn't, we didn't have the internet and experts on demand necessarily back then. So it's one of those fuzzy things. I can't quite make it. I don't know what to make of it.
Right. Yeah. The cultural appropriation, I think it's less problematic because it's not what the Haitians wanted to necessarily. Like, it's not their doing. It's what somebody has. The white devil has come in and taken their magic and is using it to their ill will.
That would
Um,
I would love to see that as like a cut scene where he's got all these Haitian servants, or just regular, maybe black English servants, people, just people from Cornwall or around there, are like, hey, come work for me. By the way, you got to bang these drums and speak in this weird,
right.
like, what are you talking about? We have nothing to do with it. Like, just
Yeah.
do
And
it.
it's like he did. Yeah. It's like he grabbed, like, they clearly got brought in. And I'm like, why do you necessarily need these guys? But anyway, yeah, the story itself is a pretty interesting one, and I think there's an interesting social commentary to be had because you have a moneyed aristocrat who has decided that it would be better to just kill the populace and resurrect them and pay them nothing, have them work for me for free, as opposed to actually paying them a living, a living wage. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that is an actual statement that's being made, because Hammer liked to poke at the moneyed rich, the aristocracy, and I don't think that's an accident. That I don't think that's an accident that political statement is in there.
Well, you gave me an idea for a horror film, either a spoof or just, something legit. Night of the Living Wage. What do you think?
I like it. I like it.
All right, so we've got this guy Clive Hamilton, who is played by John Carson, who is the guy behind all this zombie devilry, and into this village comes Sir James Forbes and his daughter. Now, this this pairing, I think, is I wanted to see more about this this father-daughter pairing going in and like solving supernatural mysteries or something, because
Yes.
the cast in this film is just phenomenal. Now, Alice, who is the girl that who the voodoo doll was being worked on, her the magic was kind of working on her in that opening scene, cutting between the ritual and her in bed. I think she had a bandaged wrist or something like that. Um, she ends up dead. We also have one of the townspeople. His brother ends up dead and zombified. So all these like strange occurrences keep happening around the town, and this father-daughter team kind of being wind up being roped into being paranormal investigators. Uh, their arrival into town is something quite remarkable, and also sets up sort of these the social commentary that you're talking about. On the carriage ride in, Sylvia, played by Diane Clare, she notices that there's a fox running through the field, and then she notices there are people on, men on horseback chasing the fox. They're hunting this animal, and they lose sight of it. And they pull over to the carriage and say, have you seen a fox around here? And she's like, oh yes, they went that way. She threw them off course. And the father is like, you shouldn't have done that. I hope we don't run into those people again, which guarantees that we will. We next see them in town. The fox hunting party races through the town, it collides with a funeral procession. It's like the opening of Superman 3 or something like that. The coffin spills open. You see the dead body in there. Everybody's kind of mortified, but that's not the last time we will see that body, because it shows up later looking rather ghoulish and ghastly, thus kind of kicking off the plague of the zombies, which, for a movie that's called Plague of the Zombies, and same issue, I guess it's an issue with Reptile too. We don't get a lot of the creature action until much later, like the third act of the film. Everything else is set up and drama, and it makes me wonder. We were kind of talking about Hammer being on the wane at the height of its powers, but also sort of in the decline.
Right, right.
Do you think this has to do with budgets, or what is it? Because this is one of a pair of the driest Hammer films, I think, in terms of blood spilt that I've seen.
Yes, that's probably true. And I think part of it is kind of to your point. There is a bit of a hang up in that the audience is very much ahead of the characters. That we know that Squire Hamilton is behind all this long before anybody else does. So it's that so it's not much of a reveal. In fact, we see he's wearing a ring, again, another kind of Dracula, nod, but he's wearing a ring during the ceremony in the opening, before the opening credits. And then we see Squire Hamilton wearing the same ring. It's like, okay, that's our guy. And it's going to take another hour for everybody else to catch up. But yes, I agree. I love watching Andre Morel and Diane Clare kind of pair off of one another. And I think I also agree. I think this is a really solid cast, with one exception. I think that what's his name, who plays Peter Thompson, the Alice's husband, the one who calls Sir John into the fray. He gets some heat from. I listened to the commentary with Troy Howarth, and he's just merciless toward that poor actor. Just every time he comes on screen, he's just like, oh God, this frigging guy again.
Okay, well, we can leave him aside. I don't want to pile on any more hate.
Yeah,
but it's.
We should probably do a quick synopsis. So, I mean, what's happening is there is this plague. There are the townspeople are dying of this mysterious plague, and nobody knows what it is. And this doctor, Peter Thompson, is he's new in town, and he got there, and then these people started dying, and of course there's suspicion cast upon him. And he reaches out to his mentor, Sir John, and asks him to come and help out. And that's when John arrives with his daughter, and the mystery starts to be delved into with this latest victim, who is, I forget the character's name, but he is the brother of Martinez.
Right. Yeah, it's very confusing looking at the cast list
Martinez.
because Martinez is the last name. There's either a John or a Martinez. I can't.
Yeah,
They're both
Martinez
Martinez's.
is the living one we see, and then and the other one is the dead brother.
Well, what I loved is that they have this problem that they solve in a very creative way, because Peter is the town, I guess, doctor ostensibly, but he, even though I think they said that this has been going on for a year and they're averaging about, well, it's been going on for a year. They've had about 12 victims of this mysterious ailment. The one kind of belligerent brother who's getting in his face says that's one a month. I don't know if he's averaging it or if they're literally just one a month. But the point is that the doctor can't figure out what the problem is because the relatives of the deceased will not let him perform an autopsy.
Right.
It's like, I think it was one of the Martineses said, they're already dead. What good is cutting them up going to do? So dealing with kind of a backwards town. And
Right.
it's not until Sylvia dies, who is, there's a
Alice.
group. Alice. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sylvia is the one who lives. I get all these people confused. Alice, when she dies, there's finally a cause to a license to perform a post-mortem
Right.
on the body. But it's one of those things where it's a clever story problem. I hadn't even thought of that as a possibility of like, well, what if no one would let the person who could solve the problem solve the problem? It's
Right.
really well handled.
Right. And I mean, and I like the fact that, they wouldn't be able to perform an autopsy because, well, the bodies aren't there anymore. Squire Hamilton has recruited them to become his undead workforce in his tin mine. I'm like, I love that, that's what he's going to do. He's got the power of resurrecting life, and I'm going to bring them back to life, and I'm going to make them work in my tin mine for nothing.
Well, and he's basically the law in the town.
Right.
But so, and this isn't really spelled out in the film, but you'd have to think that he would know that the townspeople will be so superstitious,
right,
that no one would think to go check the graves to see if the body is still in there. So it's a perfect excuse for him to steal them and have them put into his mine.
And that's one of the great scenes is when, Sir John and Peter are digging up the grave, and they're found out by two policemen, one of whom is played by Michael Ripper. Mm-hmm. And, there's that moment of, come on out of that grave, you two. And he goes, okay. And then rips open the coffin and reveals that it's empty. And it's like, okay, now the page can turn, and I love that Michael Ripper is given quite a sizable role in this one and in the Reptile. Like John Gilling, the director, really put him to good use, but it's really nice to see Michael Ripper playing an active part in solving the mystery. Like he's very much an ally and helps. Actually, he's an ally. He's like a driving force in both films. So,
yeah, I think I appreciate him more in the Reptile, which we'll get to in a few minutes, just because I think it was a richer character, and maybe it was a richer character in a film that I don't think is as rich as The Plague of the Zombies.
Agreed.
But yeah, so the long and short of it is there is one of the great visuals, I think, of this is, Clive, the Squire Clive, does not just have these zombie slaves working for him in the tin mine. He's got the kind of the fox hunting crew,
mm-hmm.
These bullies working down there overseeing the zombies, and he's like whipping them. And I don't know what they're trying to say. I feel like there's a meta commentary, or at least the idea for one, because you've got these black people who've been indentured into performing this ritual, to, I guess, bring the people back to life, but they're not the ones who are being whipped. It's all the corpses of the white villagers being whipped by other white villagers, being controlled by, the white corrupt town squire.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is Plague of the Zombies feels like a pretty rich tapestry, and there's a lot going on. And, to that end, it's unfortunate that we are a little bit ahead of the curve, because we don't really work a lot of suspense into this one. I would say that it for me, this is genuinely, it's a genuine horror film in that I'm not like frightened. I'm just kind of haunted by it. The idea that, my loved ones, my friends, my family, spouses have been kind of like transformed into these kind of mindless vehicles for the squire's devilish plans. I mean, the fact that he zombifies Alice, and he has intent to zombify, shoot, I'm blanking on her name, but the one played by Diane Clare,
Sylvia. Yeah.
Sylvia, we'll think, well, what's he going to do with them? And he's not putting them in the mine, I'll bet. So that's, it's a pretty, again, that's where I go, it's genuine horror. You're like, and I feel like that's kind of what the dream sequence, the nightmare sequence that takes place in the graveyard, which is, one of the film's kind of highlights, is this moody, kind of Peter's having a dream where the undead are rising up out of the earth, and they are slowly closing in on him. And, you can't help but think, Romero saw this at some point, because there's a lot of imagery that we'll see again of these shambling corpses that they're not slow, or they're not moving quickly, but they are inevitable, and they will get you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that dream sequence and Romero. I want to talk about both. The dream sequence aspect, it's a genuinely confusing moment. And again, we're kind of like rewinding and fast forwarding through film history with this series. So I don't know where on the timeline the idea of the fake out dream sequence came, but it's a trope by now.
Sure.
But in this movie, I think it plays so well, because when Peter, he kind of comes to in the graveyard, and then he sees, the one body and the other, and you see the one kind of creeping up behind him, like, oh my God, this is finally, we have the plague of the zombies, because it's been these like little one-offs here and there. I'm like, where's the plague? And then it happens. It is a dream sequence, which is kind of frustrating, but it's not long after that we realize that there actually is a large number of zombies, in this town. It's just they're underneath it. Now, the other thing is, Romero, this is a couple years out from Night of the Living Dead. So we're still dealing with the pre-Romero idea of what a zombie is.
Right.
And I'm not that versed in, pre-Romero zombie films, but my understanding is it was a lot of this kind of voodoo witchcraft kind of idea of just the dead being reanimated. The whole thing about them coming to life and eating human flesh and all those new rules, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but those were pretty new after him.
Yeah, Romero kind of invented that flesh-eating zombie. And in this case, it was just the reanimated dead, or someone a living person whose mind had been kind of taken over.
Okay.
So we had that in, like, I Walked with a Zombie, and, White Zombie, and even as late as like 1972, there was a blaxploitation zombie film called Sugar Hill, where we had that same kind of thing. But yeah, there weren't a lot of zombies out there. And that's why, for Hammer to kind of pick it up and say, hey, let's try a zombie film. I mean, both this and The Reptile are attempts to do something that is not anything out of the Universal vault. Like none of these monsters have been seen with any regularity. And none of them are, even though, like Plague of the Zombies is basically a vampire film, and Reptile is basically like a werewolf film.
I wasn't thinking of Reptile as a werewolf film. I was thinking as a vampire film, but I was just going off the obvious like fang imagery and the neck thing. But we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But I do want to talk about I think the pretty spectacular ending of Plague of the Zombies, which takes place in a mine. It's an underground setting. There's a raging fire, and I could be talking about either of these movies because both end and have underground climaxes with raging fires.
Yep.
But it is rather nice to see the tables turned and the zombies kind of, to your point, they're not, they are just kind of like these mindless creatures that are inevitable. And that's almost as scary as the idea of, I got to get away from this thing because it's going to eat me. It's I got to get away from this thing because I don't know what it's going to do.
Right. And that's where I go, the difference between like terror and horror. Like terror is fear for your life and health. And then horror is just like things that ought not be. And I feel like this kind of taps into that kind of true horror. I mean, similarly, like when Alice is resurrected, out of her grave, and she starts walking toward, Peter and Sir John with that kind of really eerie, like leer that she has, terrifying. But you don't know what she's going to do. Like we've been given no evidence that they're going to do anything because we haven't even seen the dream sequence yet, where like it grabs Peter.
And that's a great point too. I had an idea of what she might do because I've watched zombie movies that came out, after this and for the next, 50 years or whatever.
Right.
But I can imagine in 1966, just the idea of there's this abomination coming towards me and I got to get the hell out of there. One thing I will notice, and it's a flub that I caught, and I hate that I caught it.
Oh no, there's a few flubs in this one, so I'm curious to hear which one you got.
This is specific to Alice's resurrection.
Yes.
When they open up the coffin, you can see that it's kind of a faraway shot, but you can see her down in there. She's got the blue face makeup.
Yeah, she's already got the gray makeup on, and then they do the time lapse.
Yeah,
transformation.
So we cut to the close up, and that's a pretty cool transformation. I think it takes a little bit too long.
Yeah, I agree.
But then maybe again, it's 1966. People they probably would have been more fascinated by like, oh my God, she's changing in front of my eyes.
Yeah, well, so that's one of the hiccups. The other one is like, and I do love this scene, by the way, like where the zombie is holding Alice in his arms and he kind of throws her and she rolls down the hill. But when he throws her and she rolls down the hill, just as she rolls to a stop, you see her blink really quickly. And
I saw that too.
Yep. Just as Sylvia gets to her. I think there's one. Oh, the other thing, and I've never noticed this before, but in the closing credits, Peter Thompson's name is spelled Tompson, Thompson. And on the coffin lid, it's spelled Thompson, like how we traditionally see Thompson spelled, with a THOM. And I did a little internet research and I can't find Thompson, like as a spelling. Like, I think somebody made a mistake in the closing credits because clearly, I mean, they went through the time of engraving THOMP, like clearly that's what it should be. But now in all of the reference books and on the internet and everywhere, it's spelled TOMP. And I'm just like, man, some intern was asleep at the switch and it's spelled it TOMP. Even like the Shout Factory subtitles spell it half the time with TOMP and half the time THOMP. Anyway, so a major diversion, but it just distracted me the whole movie.
That's really sad. And no, no, I think you've got it all wrong, sir. I think what happened was they just had a Thompson coffin in the town ready to go. And they were like, it's close enough. This guy, I don't care what his name was. Shove him in the Thompson coffin. No one's going to know. Right.
Just put him in she goes in the Thompson coffin. So that, and I just want a couple other things, because as I started like nitpicking, what's funny is that like the nitpicking does not distract. I love this movie. I think it's a great movie, but there's also like there's the inordinate amount of blood that he gets out of her little tiny cut. Like he fills one vial and then he pours that vial into another vial. And just like, oh my God, she only bled like that much.
And she was already kind of pale looking to begin with.
And then like during the fiery climax, there is a zombie who is clearly wearing like a stuntman asbestos mask.
Oh my God.
That just like comes front and center, like goes, hi, I'm wearing a mask, and then walk. And like, Michael Myers, how did you get here?
I made that same note. There's a couple of them because they're wearing the flame retardant outfits and everything,
right,
because they are actually on fire. It's uncomfortable. This, and also the scene in Reptile.
Yes.
You realize this is pre-CGI. This is probably pre like major safety regulations.
Yeah. Oh, this is just straight up dangerous.
Right. But I thought to myself, that mask looks like the mask from like Halloween 5. When they weren't even trying anymore.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't even trying to hide it.
But I do want to say, the coffins, I loved the coffins. I love the fact that there is, the squire had a desk drawer in his office, and the middle drawer, you could only open it with a hidden button, which is like right around the corner from the drawer, the regular pull drawer. But he had these coffins in there, and I just kept thinking, horror conventions, there has to be an independent like artist out there who has made Plague of the Zombies coffins that you can open up, and there's like a little voodoo doll with the blood in there.
Ooh,
And if not,
that
do it.
exactly. Get on it. Before we jump over to Reptile, I want to just toss out kudos to, I think Andre Morel is absolutely fantastic in the role of Sir John.
Yes.
It's what's interesting is, I mean, you have kind of like, it's clear that like these roles would have been played by Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Like you have your basic, evil avatar, and you have your good avatar. And I think Andre Morel does a fantastic Van Helsing, basically. And then John Carson is really quite lovely as Squire Hamilton. He's very polite. He's very measured. And that makes him just all the more sinister. And I really love his performance. They talk a little bit on the commentary about how his vocal quality is very similar to James Mason. And, I think that makes him, I mean, that's why Mason was such a great villain, is that he had that kind of smooth, measured delivery. And I think Carson is he's a fantastic villain, even if he's a little one note. I think it's a really good note.
Right. And I think it's kind of fascinating, the idea that you could take the two sort of elderly, not even elderly, but the older male leads in this movie and swap them out and still be really convinced. I could buy that, John Carson could be a good guy. And I could also see Andre Morel just like turning it by a little degree towards sinister.
Yeah.
And I think it would work. In fact, now I want to see that movie. But let's talk about the Reptile. I've seen the imagery for the movie of the reptile face, because it's all over the Shout Blu-ray and everything. This creature with the weird, taped on bug eyes and all that. But I didn't know really what the story was about. I always assumed it was like a little lizard boy that was being kept on an estate somewhere, like from a mutant accident. Turns out it's not, a lizard at all, and it's definitely not a boy. That was a big surprise to me, all the way up, probably way past the point where it should have been obvious, because I was like, well, it's a little boy, right? It's like a little Jason Voorhees. There's your Friday the 13th reference.
Thank you.
Being kept on this estate. But no, and I felt like a heel during the reveal. Didn't mean to rhyme, but like, of course it would be the daughter.
Well, and again, I think good on you for suspending your disbelief long enough to not fall. But it was, for me, I was kind of like, I get, like clearly it's her, so let's get on with it, because it's not that big of a surprise. But that said, even though, like it's not that big of a surprise, I love what we do see. I love how things are, wait for it, how the layers are revealed. I mean, there are so many. Well, let's do a quick synopsis. So, and again, here's another comparison. So there's an epidemic, taking place in Clagmore Heath, which is the Cornish village where this takes place. And there's the Black Death, that's sweeping the land. And Harry Spalding travels with his new wife to the village to kind of investigate his brother's death. And he falls in with, a few of the locals, and that leads him to Dr. Franklin, who has his daughter played by Jacqueline Pierce. And there's this horrible family secret that we slowly become aware of. But I hadn't thought about the fact that we have two villages where there are people dying of mysterious illnesses, and somebody has to come in from out of town. It's like, there are quite a few little comparisons here.
Well, the Plague of the Zombies takes place, I think they mention the year because there's a headstone, like one of the recent victims. It was like, I'm going to say 1864 or some nonsense, but I almost got the feeling that they could take place in the same village, just like a few decades apart. There is some great symmetry, I think, here. um, with the opening sequence in which this, young man is kind of traveling through or walking through the country. He goes up through this house and he sees someone, and it turns out, well, it was Dr. Franklin, right? Who was yelling at him like, "Get out of here, or go away," or something. And then the guy is attacked by something mysterious and shadowy, and he falls down the steps. And when he is finally revealed to us, his skin is turned kind of greenish gray and scaly. His eyes are
Right.
yellowy red, and he's got foam coming out of his mouth. And that turns out to be the brother of Captain Spaulding.
Captain Spaulding. Pretty funny.
Yeah, talk about the plague of the zombies. Rob Zombie was watching this movie when he came up with his own cinematic universe, and that's not a complaint, because every time the guy was on screen from there on, I was like, "That's Captain Spaulding." Tutti fucking fruity.
That's right.
But no, towards the end of the film, because the opening scene takes place during the day, at the end of the film, you get the exact same sequence pretty much, but at night, and the results are different because Captain Spaulding is attacked, but he does not die. I think it's because, help me out with this, is it not only because there's an antidote of some kind later on, but also, are we meant to believe because he had a high collar that
That's
the
right.
fangs
That's
couldn't
right.
quite
Yeah.
get all the way into the neck?
I think that is the conceit, is that he's bitten through the collar, and therefore he doesn't get the full dose of venom that the others do. Plus, he was able to get home in time, to have it lanced and bleed some of the venom out.
Right. There's also another Friday the 13th reference when the couple comes into town. Harry, played by Ray Barrett, goes into the local tavern, and everybody clears out. We even have a Crazy Ralph type character.
That's right. I thought that was going to be the Friday the 13th reference.
There's so many, including the little boy who drowned. No, that was really weird. But no, it is crazy how many parallels there are. But no, he goes into the bar, everybody clears out, and then we meet Tom Bailey. It's Bailey, right? Played by Michael Ripper.
Right.
I love this performance more than I think I did his role in Plague of the Zombies. He's the local tavern owner. We come to find out that both he and Harry had been, in a previous life, they'd traveled the world. They'd both been in military service, and that kind of gives them insight into this, the kind of cultural, magical practices that they find themselves up against back in Cornwall. But I also just love this idea. Tom gives a speech towards the end, or it made a passage of dialogue about how he wants to stay, in the town. He wants to die in the town because when he was over, in the service, he had one dream, and that was to open up a little bar back home. And damn it, that's what he was going to die doing. And it's just, especially because it's Michael Ripper, delivering that line. Like, I want to know that guy. I want to go live in his tavern.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I think, by this point, Michael Ripper had become kind of a beloved touchstone for Hammer. And, again, John Gilling really gives him something to do. And John Gilling, man, I'm not sure now, and I'm going to have to dig around while I talk about this. But the idea that, you've got Michael Ripper, who is given a really kind of a heroic role. He is one of the prime movers. He is the solution. If it weren't for Tom Bailey, we wouldn't, but the hero would not have survived. And I don't think he's often given that kind of opportunity.
Yeah. Now, as far as this, I was going to call it a plague, but the incidents with the lizard bite, we get a few victims. I feel ashamed of this, but I was so tuned out watching this movie, partially because I started at 4:30 in the morning after having only a few hours of sleep.
It's a bad habit.
It really is, but it's also, I was not prepared for another one of the movies where things don't really kick into high gear until the last 25 minutes. I'm like, there's these little clues and things here and there. I'm like, I get it. When am I going to see this monster? And we finally see the monster. Actually, I want to fast forward a little bit. The last 5 minutes where the reptile creature is in the study and attacking Valerie, right? That was our heroine in this one?
Mhm.
My 5-year-old had woken up and he came out and was watching this, and it was kind of an experiment. I'm like, is this gonna freak him the hell out? Because he's never really seen a monster movie before.
Ah, and did it?
No, he's like, Daddy, why is that house on fire? That's what
Do you
he picked
not
up.
do you not notice the lizard woman like right in the middle?
Especially when she's like coming at the camera, like,
Right,
"Ah."
right. Yeah.
I was getting a little freaked out.
Well, that is actually Jacqueline Pierce under that makeup. She was quite the trooper. And she actually got this gig. She was not originally cast as this in this role, and she was cast for the part of Alice in Plague of the Zombies. And John Gilling or whomever decided that she would be great for the Reptile. And so they cast her for the basically the female lead in Reptile. And I think she gives I think she's, she's the stronger of the two female characters in both films.
Expound on that a bit.
Well, I mean, you've got your basic ingenue, of Sylvia in Plague of the Zombies, and then you've got Valerie, who is the wife of Harry Spalding. And not both of them are perfectly serviceable performances, but they're kind of straight ahead, ingenues. Mm-hmm. And whereas I feel like Jacqueline Pierce in Plague of the Zombies, we see her kind of like fighting against this illness, and then we see her, transformed into this kind of ghoul. And here we see her. There's clearly a power dynamic going on between her and her father, and like she loves the kittens and things like that she has, in her house. And you can also tell that she's kind of struggling with the fact that those are her food, and by the end, here she is encased in Roy Ashton's makeup. And she's given a great monster performance with her tongue flickering between the fangs and like advancing. I just think she does a really great job. And I'm kind of sorry that Hammer didn't use her more than they did.
There's one, help me out. What is that instrument called that she was playing?
The sitar.
Was that a sitar? Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense because it's looks like a guitar. But there's a scene where she is playing this instrument like in the kind of the drawing room with her father, and then the Malay played by Marnie Maitland, mm-hmm. Who is the sinister kind of person pulling the strings, I guess, behind the scenes. And it gets really kind of sinister and convoluted, but there's almost like a dueling pianos, but there's only one instrument being played. She pulls out the sitar and starts kind of playing this nice tune, but it gets angrier and angrier. The intensity ramps up, and there's these great like close-ups of her face and her dad's face, and then the Malay kind of like watching from the shadows. It's like that is almost a great little mini movie in and of itself, removed from the Reptile. I almost wish there was more of that intensity and nuance in the rest of the picture.
Agreed. I mean, I think that it's one of the examples of kind of pure cinema. You couldn't have that. That wouldn't play like in a book. Like it really is, and it's not. There's no dialogue exchange. It's just looks and cutting back and forth. And I think the music that she's playing, I couldn't remember exactly what they said on the commentary, but I think that it calls back the music that was playing when Dr. Franklin was in India. And I agree, it's a bit convoluted, and when he's doing all the exposition spill at the end, you're just like, okay, but everything's on fire, and so I don't really know what you're saying. But he apparently he had stolen some of their magic, and in return for that, they cursed his daughter so that she would become a reptile and be forced to kind of feed, and like she actually sheds her skin at one point. So there's a lot of, I mean, again, I don't know what the rules are. I don't think the rules of the Reptile are set up very well in the way that, like the Curse the Werewolf, those are a little clearer as to how this works. But I do enjoy, her performance, and, like, I think just kind of as a straight up monster movie, it works I think you do have to do a little more work in terms of just kind of going along with it, because it's not as cut and dried as it could be.
Right. It also the dynamic kind of reminded me of the Mummy that we talked about last month or the month before. The whole idea of the kind of the English folks taking this artifact back with them, and then they have the kind of the native tracking them to back home and kind of wreaking havoc that way. There is a symmetry there. I think this might be a kind of a cool coupling. I think that film is stronger overall than the Reptile, but
The Mummy, yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I was happy that I watched it. I think it was a classic sad monster ending, because she wasn't evil, she was just the victim of this curse, and she kind of she had almost two deaths, because she was in the cave, the underground cave that was set on fire.
Right.
Like, oh, she's gonna burn up, but then we have to, of course, have the last confrontation in the study with our damsel in distress before she gets, I guess, sort of rescued. How did that work? Michael Ripper comes along and busts out the window, but then she is able to go back through the study door. She finally gets it open.
Well, her husband comes in and gets her, I think. Like Michael Ripper gets Spaulding, and they both go together to the house, Dr. Franklin's house, and Ripper breaks in the one window, and then Spaulding comes in the other door and gets her and takes her out of there.
Right. It's just a weird strategy, because if the Ripper character hadn't busted through that window,
right,
that was just enough of a distraction to kind of throw off the reptile lady.
Well, it makes her cold, like, because she can't handle it. When the window breaks, that's what kind of like freezes her, and she goes, it's cold, I'm cold, and that kind of immobilizes her like a lizard.
I did not pick up on that. Again, it's probably very obvious, but I kept thinking, like, why wouldn't they both just run through the front door and try and bust the door down together?
Well, and also why, how would Michael Ripper know that? It was just kind of one of those lucky breaks. The fact that he was trying to save her, it let in the cold air that kind of immobilized the lizard. But I agree. I think she's a tragic monster, and I think the Dr. Franklin character is a tragic monster as well. I mean, he's kind of he is an unwilling participant in this relationship with the Malay, where he's kind of his slave. And there's that fascinating sequence where the Malay slaps him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to have a person of color slapping an elderly white man in 1966 must have been pretty strong stuff. But it sets up that clearly the Malay has power here that we're not aware of.
And here's I don't know when this came out in relation to In the Heat of the Night, because that was another kind of a milestone where Sidney Poitier slaps that guy, right?
Right.
So there was something afoot in the 1960s, a bit of revolution there.
Indeed.
But I will say, as goofy as that scene is of Michael Ripper kind of busting through the window, it was fascinating to me, because this is the first time I can recall in a movie where someone breaks through a window, but they can't get all the way in, because like the glass shatters, but the frame element,
scaffolding, right?
That stays intact, and you can't get through it. Usually in movies, like, you break a window and everything just instantly falls apart and people can crawl out.
Right.
Kudos for that. But
I just looked up In the Heat of the Night. It was 1967, and so this film predated it.
Wow. All right. So are you saying that that In the Heat of the Night ripped off the Reptile?
I'm totally going to go on record saying that.
All right. So any final thoughts on the Reptile and or the Plague of the Zombies?
This was the last film that Roy Ashton did for Hammer. Roy Ashton had done such things as Phantom of the Opera and Curse the Werewolf and Plague of the Zombies. And this was the last film he did. They asked him if he would go and do their next film, and he was just like, no, I'm done. So he did continue to work, just not with Hammer. He did I think it's Legend of the Werewolf, 1975. But he continued to work as a makeup man, but it was kind of the end of his tenure with Hammer.
Hmm.
And the other person who probably deserves some recognition here is Arthur Grant, who's the cinematographer. And he was definitely a key player with Hammer, and he shot a ton of their stuff, and he does a really nice work here. Like he shot Curse the Werewolf, Old Dark House, Phantom of the Opera. We're going to see him in several of the films that we're covering later this year: Quatermass in the Pit, Devil Rides Out, and I think he does a really nice job in the especially in Plague of the Zombies. I like some of the kind of moody camera work and lighting that he does.
Definitely. Well, speaking of which, what are we talking about next month, sir?
We're going to, well, in our continuing expanse into Hammer doing things that aren't universal monsters, we're going to go back in time to 1 million BC, which we will have some fantastic stop motion animation, courtesy of Ray Harryhausen.
Nice.
And we'll have Raquel Welch in her iconic fur bikini.
Even nicer. I look forward to that. Well, thank you for I guess helping put this whole roster together. This double feature was a welcome surprise. Even though I wasn't crazy about the Reptile, I still like it. And I think I just need to watch it again, maybe when I've had some more coffee. Before I let you go, AC,
Yes.
I want to wish a happy birthday to you and to me.
I would like to wish a happy birthday to you. Congratulations on making it this far.
Thank you. And
yes,
and right back at you.
I'll take it.
So yeah, this is going up on our collective birthdays.
Collective birthdays, sure.
So, yeah.
And respectful birthdays. I respect you ever so much and ever more every day.
Oh, well, thank you. It's the Mutual Admiration Society here on the Kicking the Seat podcast. And it's also the Son of Hammerland, which we are bringing to a close this month. So once again, AC, thank you. Folks, check out Horror 101 with Dr. AC, link down below, and I'll also link to his reviews of The Plague of the Zombies and The Reptile. So you can check those out at your leisure. And if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And join us back here next month. Well, I mean, next month is like tomorrow, which is weird. So later in the month for Son of Hammerland, 1 million years BC.
1 million BC. Yeah, 1 million. It's 1 million years BC.
All right.
It's a remake of 1 million BC, which was from 1940s, from the 1940s with Victor Mature.
Really? They remade 1 million BC. They just made it 1 million years BC?
It is a remake, one of those.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about it. All right, man. Thank you very much.
We're halfway through our journey this year. We're six months in. So
wow.
I'm excited to see what the latter half of 2022 has in store.
Are you talking about in terms of movies or just the world? Because I don't know if I can join you on that one.
On a closing note, I will say thank you for providing a little distraction from the chaos that is. The announcement came on Friday, and it was nice to be able to kind of spend the weekend not thinking about that. And I think it's worth pointing out that, to our viewers that, it's okay to take a little time out and enjoy a distraction and remember the things that you enjoy in life, as opposed to focusing on the things that are perhaps not going the way we'd like them to. So I appreciate you. And again, if you're taking time out to watch this is probably certainly not on your required viewing, and we appreciate you taking time out and spending a little time with us.
Well said, sir. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this every month. I don't know how you keep coming back, but it's always fun. All right, man, take it easy. And once again, happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Bye.
Bye.